CFB Paint Week 10 is in the books. I'm back with you this week, Brian. We've got Steve and Court both on the call today. Awesome week of college football we want to dive into. A lot of close games, a lot of near upsets, some actual upsets. But before we do, we're going to start with our rapid round, get our instant reactions. So we're going to do it on the order of the worst handwriting. And there was a little bit of chatter before we started on who this might be. Steve, do you want to lead us off with who you think might have the worst handwriting here?
I am hands down the one with the worst handwriting. The funny thing is, like, even now for work, like, I keep a notebook right next to my desk where I write down like notes of things I need to do. I do put reminders in my calendar and stuff, but it's just chicken scratch, chicken scratch, chicken scratch. I've got notebooks full of it,
When you
reminding me of.
you read it, that's the question.
Oh yeah. So the other thing is, like, my wife and I keep like a little. It's called, like, oh gosh, I can't even remember. Some little journal where there's like 5 lines for a day, and it's 5 years, right? So you have like the same day, like, for instance, today's November 6th. November 6th, we have it for 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and eventually 2024. And we go back every day, we write in it, and then we read what happened in previous years. And there's always like a few times where if I'm the one that's written that day, you read the sentence and all of a sudden there's a pause. And sometimes I'm like, here, give it to me. Let me decipher it. And a few times it takes me a little bit, but it's usually pretty quick. But my wife is sometimes like adamant. She's like, no, I'm going to figure this one out. But there are a few times she has to admit defeat. She'll be like, what on earth does that say?
I think I'm probably a close second on this one. I also keep a notebook at my desk at all times, and I jot stuff down. And sometimes I go back, and sometimes I don't. But it's just kind of how I process information. There, I just have to write it down for a second. And when I write down just for me, it's pretty chicken scratchy to where it's not super legible to everyone else. When I write it down to be read by somebody else, I'm capable of upgrading my handwriting at least to legibility. So it's not particularly pretty in any way, but it can be read by most people. My standard handwriting is very quick and dirty, and I think maybe puts me in the second position here. But Corey, give us some insight onto you.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I write down things, but the problem is that sometimes I write it down and I can't read it. I'm like, I don't know what I was writing there. Like, I also have noticed that as I look at my handwriting and get older, I see parts of mom's handwriting and parts of dad's handwriting in my handwriting. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed that. Seen our parents' handwritings, but like if I go in all caps, then I'm like I can see parts of dad's, and then if I decide to do any cursive, I can see parts of mom's. But I do have a wife that taught first, second, and third grade, and occasionally she has to go, what was that? I don't understand that one.
Yikes.
So it tells you that there's it's not the best. But if I need to make it legible, it's okay. So I don't know.
Right.
Sounds like I'm right there with you, Brian.
I was gonna say we sound on pretty level pegging there. We'll let Steve go first. Corey, I'll let you take runner up. I'll take best handwriting in the group. Why not?
Yeah.
I get rewarded.
Like correlated to intellect if you have worse handwriting versus best handwriting. So I don't want to be the best handwriting,
Yeah. No, that for all of us, that's very comforting information for sure.
Well, all those years of not working on my penmanship have now paid off. This is what we were building towards. So, really, the big thing for me is that there's just competitive games take all shapes and sizes, right? You had Washington USC, which was a barn burner of a game, but very little defense being played, very little like tackling, just like football. You may not recognize it when you're watching some elements of that game because there wasn't a whole lot of offensive line or defensive line play. Like, there's some things that were a little bit rough when it comes to just from a technical standpoint of how football has historically and traditionally been played that were maybe missing from that game. But you also had slugfests that were played in the teens. I mean, the Miami NC State game was it's funny. I was listening to a Miami recap of that because I don't like Miami and I like watching them be sour and bitter that they've lost. But they're like, I felt like I was watching Iowa football. Like, so it was a pretty fun week. Some title contenders got tested and even pushed to the brink. K-State, Texas comes to mind. So there's some where it looked like things were where the game was well in hand, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. So I don't know. Like I don't know if there's like a main takeaway from this week, but it was again another entertaining week that held my attention basically all Saturday, and it was another fun one.
I'll go next.
Awesome week of college football. Oh, sorry, I forgot I was third. You go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, no, I'll go next. The Big 12 semifinals were fun to watch.
Oh yeah, nice.
Like you had Texas and then Oklahoma and Oklahoma State and then Kansas State, and then even Iowa State decided it wasn't going to show up and take itself out. So like we have an interesting week with these teams. These teams now, Texas and Oklahoma State, have relatively easy schedules. Oklahoma State plays all newcomers: BYU, Houston. I don't know off the top of my head, like UCF, and then Texas plays some of the remaining of the Big 12, but not quality teams. They should win out and they should go against each other. But if either team slips, I think Oklahoma's right there in the waiting to pounce on the opportunity to play. And honestly, I'd love to see another Red River shootout. Red River showdown. Sorry. And no, I'm just kidding. And but it'd be interesting to see how Texas does without their quarterback. They looked okay, but there were some turnovers in that second half that allowed Kansas State to get back in the game. Overall, I think teams played well, but they had turnovers and let other teams get back in the game that probably shouldn't have been there. I'm looking at like Clemson was kind of close with that. Texas was close with that. There were quite a number of teams that had issues with turnovers that nearly cost them or cost them the game. Taking an Air Force as well. Just an interesting week of football.
Yeah. For me, despite the awesome USC Washington game, this was a SEC week and it was a Big 12 week for me. The Kansas State Texas game. First of all, we've talked about Sarkisian and Corey's skepticism that I think all of us to share to some degree of his in-game coaching. Again, not the problem. We talked about that with Oklahoma. And we said, hey, this was a close game that you lost, but you didn't lose it because of Sark. This game should have been close, and it was not Sark's fault. It was players coming up with fumbles, basically handing the ball away to keep it close. Kansas State really wasn't being that competitive with Texas, but they end up taking them to overtime. And that's not to disrespect Kansas State, but that's just kind of, I don't think this would be as close if they played it again this next week. Then you look at Oklahoma State, who I've been riding with my picks the last several weeks. This is perhaps the most Mike Gundy season of all time. They had an absolute exodus through the transfer portal. It's Spencer Sanders, their quarterback for several years ago, a lot of other players, and it was just like, well, who's going to be left to do anything here? And now they're staring down a potential 10-2. They've got to go beat some newcomers in the Big 12 to reach that and to make it to the Big 12 title game. So that, I don't know. I couldn't. I picked them for this last week to beat Oklahoma, but it was really with heart, not head. And surprisingly, they get the job done. And then the SEC really came to life to me for this week. It has been a little bit, I don't want to say boring, because no college football is super boring to me, but a little bit lackluster in terms of watching SEC football this year for me. LSU Alabama was an excellent game. Ole Miss Texas A&M was an excellent game. Florida Arkansas was an awesome game. Georgia Missouri, the big, bigger programs, the bigger brands within this this conference came together, collided, and gave us a lot of things to think about going forward. Where some looked, like Georgia's looking really good. They didn't cover the spread, but I think they played well in that Missouri game. Didn't give me any reason to think that they're not gonna go through to the SEC title game. But now is the first time in a little bit where I've thought, okay, Bama, they just have the one loss to Texas. They're looking as strong as they've looked all season in this win over LSU. All they've got to do is win out, and they need one loss from somebody else somewhere. That's probably going to happen. I think that's pretty reasonable. They might be right in there. They might not even need the one loss. Who knows?
They'll need Texas to lose, I think, or Texas to win out.
Oh, probably true. Probably
one
true.
of those two.
But yeah, just an awesome week, and the playoff conversation is coming together and starting to get more and more interwoven. And just as you think a team might be out, they're back in, and As soon as you think a team is in, they're back out. I'm excited to see how it unfolds, but really a great week, especially in those two conferences, Big 12 and SEC. With that, we're going to jump right into some of the games that we had this week. We'll start with the number one team in the country, who is your Ohio State Buckeyes. Won by 21-19. Won in big fashion over Rutgers, but the score is a little bit flattering to Ohio State overall. Corey, why don't you tell us a little bit about that one?
Dude, Rutgers made this an interesting game. I think they led like 7-6 at halftime or down by 7-6. I can't remember exactly.
I think they were 9-7 at half.
9-7 at half? I don't know. But they made it a close game until they decided to throw a little pop pass and overthrew the pop pass, and Ohio State takes it for a touchdown, like 90-something 3 yards or something like that for a touchdown. And that kind of springboards Ohio State and says, all right, we need to start playing this game, because Rutgers have played good defense against them and was able to move the ball. They weren't able to finish, but they were able to move the ball and put field goals on the board. And if you could just turn a few of those field goals into a touchdown, and even if like you don't turn over that one ball, I mean, that's a potentially 10-point swing right there. All right, we're within a touchdown difference here, potentially even 14-point swing. So I mean, it's sad. This Greg Schiano team is fighting really well. Just imagine if they had real talent on the team. Sorry.
Yeah, a couple things I had to say on this. Like, number one, there's that pick six. There's a questionable targeting that does not get called on that play.
Where at?
It's on the person who's hit that causes the carom. Like, causes that ball to bounce. Causes the ball to bounce. Like, it's the hit after. There's one that, I mean, they talked with, on the broadcast, they brought in their rules expert who was like, I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but he kind of defended the no call. To me, I've seen a lot weaker targetings called. We may talk about one a little bit later. Just like somewhere it's like, to me, just because the helmet's touch just doesn't necessarily mean it's targeting, right? Like that to me is the thing that I think is getting lost, where it's like, if their helmets touch at all, it's targeting. It's helmet to helmet, or it's like, if I lead with my shoulder, my head is not far away from my shoulder. That's human anatomy, right? Like there's just not a big distance here. And so it's not uncommon for us to, like, where is the contact actually being initiated, to me is really should be the question. Like, all right, if I am, so anyway, that was a questionable no call in that game that would have changed things. I'm going to go back to kind of the again, I need to coin whatever the phrase is for this principle. I don't kick field goals when I'm in one score games. Like, Rutgers, fine. You want to kick that first field goal to bring it within 3-7, get on the board, fine. I'm not kicking a field goal being down by one score to be down by a smaller one score. Like, and that was the name of the game. Rutgers field goals in that first half, they hit a field goal on 4th and 2 from the Ohio State 4. They hit a field goal on 4th and goal from the Ohio State 3, and then they hit a field goal at 3rd and goal with that one's with no time left on the clock. That one's, to me, is a little bit more permissible, right? There's 3 seconds left. All right, fine. Like, if you want to kick that one, and that one is to take the lead, but you just had 3 at bats in the second quarter within the 5. I think at some point you have to say, there's just not a whole lot of likelihood we're going to prevent Ohio State, which, again, is not the prolific offense that we've come to associate with Ohio State in the last 5 to 7 years. But all the same, it still has a ton of talent on that side of the ball. I just don't think it's likely that you're going to pull them into a 20-point game, particularly if you're Rutgers. If you're Notre Dame, different story, right? You have a really talented defense. You can probably keep that game in the teens or the low 20s. I just think you have to score some points at some point and give yourself a chance. Really put some game pressure on Ohio State. I think at 9-7 at halftime, I don't think Ohio State's sweating it at all. But if you turn one of those into a touchdown and you're up 13-7, that's a different story.
Like, and they moved the ball. Like you said, they were within the 5-yard line for those field goals. But even when they have the turnovers on downs, they're like at the 17 or at the 6.
Yeah.
And they can't finish. So like this is a bend don't break from Ohio State a little bit.
Definitely.
Yeah, and to their credit, they didn't. As I was there was a lot of great games in this slate, and I didn't follow this one as closely as others, but it seemed to me that one of the key differences is, Rutgers isn't finishing their drives and getting touchdowns. Ohio State is, at least in the second half, is able to do that, and that's where it was 9-7 at half, and it's like, well, if you had, you have to kind of like flip the coin sometimes and risk what it is, because it's like if you go for it on fourth, you're not guaranteed to score. But you have to take the chance of like, what if we were, 21-7 at half, or two of them are touchdowns, because again, the one at the end is time's expiring is a little bit different. You kind of have to play on that what if you're making an upset. If you're a evenly matched team, it becomes a little bit more, I don't know, to me it becomes a little bit more, hey, we'll stick with them, stay close, and then we'll take our other opportunities that we get. When you have these opportunities as a team that is so outmatched, I think you have to roll the dice and give it a shot. Nonetheless, Ohio State goes ahead and takes care of business. They are likely to be the number one team still by the college football playoff ranking, which, again, doesn't matter yet. Steven's shaking his head. He's thinking we might get
I don't think
Georgia.
So. I think Georgia takes them over.
We'll see. Any other thoughts on that game before we move on to Texas and Kansas State? All right, Corey, I'm going to let you dive in on that one. Texas comes close to their second loss of the year. They go to overtime, but get the win. Tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, so Texas comes out and they're, up 17-0, and I'm like, okay, this game's over. Let's move on to another game. And then I see the score coming back, and I'm like, all right, let's go back and figure out what happened and watch this. And in reality, it's just, like you said, Brian, from the beginning, I'm not a big believer in Sark. Sark has not cost them a game this yeir. It's been players that have cost them a game.
Coached a really good game, yeah.
Yeah, and in reality, I think they have an interception and they have a fumble on back-to-back plays within their own 30-yard line, and Kansas State is able to score 2 touchdowns off of that and make it a real game. They are very, 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 very lucky that Kansas State botches that extra point in the end and then decides to go for it on 4th down, which we all know Steve thinks was the right call, and I'm not sure if I do. So
when you've missed 2 field goals, like, it's not guaranteed. Everyone's acting right now like, oh, I kicked that, I go into the next overtime. Like, you don't know if he's gonna make it.
But you've had,
to me, that to me was the bigger risk, is sending out that kicker.
I agree, but you had 3 very poor plays, and then you ran a 4th, even poorer play within those last 10 yards. Like, I might risk the kick. I don't know. Either way, it ends up with a loss, and the team that honestly should be moving forward does move forward. It sucks for them because they don't have Quinn Ewers, and so they're doing it with their backup. And in reality, I think if Quinn was out in this game, they'd be dominating these games. And so I hope that Quinn comes back at the end of the season so that we do get to see this Texas team at full strength, because this is a Texas team that beat, granted, it's not the Bama that is now, right? They beat the Bama that struggled with what is it?
USF.
Yeah, USF. Like, they beat that Bama. Could they beat this Bama? I think they probably could. I think that they could have, and I think they could beat the OU that they faced previously. But they just got to continue to click. This Texas team is good when they have all their weapons. But yeah.
Steve, thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, Corey hit the nail on the head. And actually, if you go back and listen to our preview episode, I feel like we were all over this one. We were like, if Quinn Ewers plays this game, I don't think it's not like a blowout, but it's not. I don't think the game's in jeopardy for Texas deep into it. And really, truth be told, yeah, without a couple of turnovers, this one isn't close for, even with only an okay effort from Malik Murphy, but resilience from Kansas State is impressive. Like, again, that's a program that's easy to root for from the outside looking in. I had no problem with them going for it on the final, 4 yards out. Like, again, the kicking game has missed an extra point and a potential tying field goal with 2 minutes left. Let's see, when did he take that field goal? Yeah, with 1:40 45, and it's a 27-yarder that he misses. Like, so you can't trust that guy to go out there and kick that. I mean, if you do and he misses, your entire team probably, like, think of your offensive players where it's like you aren't going to give us one more crack at the end zone. And not only is it like that crack at the end zone isn't just to keep the game going, which kicking a field goal, which is already a roll of the dice, only only continues the game, right? It doesn't
No,
give you the opportunity to win. If you score a touchdown, you're walking them off, and and you've pulled a huge win, including one that in conference would essentially give you the inside track to the Big 12 championship game. So I don't have any problem with the call there. I mean, Texas is a good team, right? You're not expected to win. You weren't expected to win going into the game. Why not roll the dice on one play and see, like, hey, if we can win, I don't blame him one bit for taking that shot. So, like, I would have done the same thing. It's funny. So, like, maybe I should tell the story. So, like, I was following games. So I was kind of as I was going, I wasn't like watching anything like super intently. I was kind of doing other things, but they were going on in the background. And this one, like with the YouTube TV, like I had like the sound on a separate of like the 4 games that I had going on at that time. And then all of a sudden I just noticed that the score was like that Kansas State was scoring a touchdown to potentially take the lead with an extra point, which they missed. And then I was like, okay, I'll just listen to this one as I'm kind of doing other things. I was, just spending some time with our daughter and had my head down a little bit. But then we went to our niece's piano recital as it's going into overtime. And so I just like mentioned it to my wife. So we had it like playing on, like, my phone is now streaming it and it's playing through the speakers in our car via Bluetooth. And so I'm driving as the whole thing's going on. And she's just asking me, like, they're going to go for it. I was like, I think this is the right decision. Well, I think I told her once Texas kicked a field goal in overtime, I was like, if I'm Kleeman, I'm telling my offensive coordinator, I'm telling Colin Klein, you have 4 downs every set of downs that we get here from the 25 in, because like I've got the chance to win the game and steal a game that I really didn't deserve. And then it goes to 4th down. She's like, "What are you gonna do?" I was like, "Yeah, it's easy for me to armchair quarterback it right now." Like, and even then, like, it's like, oh, dude, you get back to that indecision. Like, is this the right call? Is it the wrong? That's why they're paid the big bucks, I guess. I had no problem with it. People are mad because of the result.
They did hit a 45-yarder as time expired, so he had hit one since the 2 misses to kind of force it. So he kind of had a chance to get his head right, and did get his head right when the pressure was on. So I'm like, I can see it working out. But yeah.
But I mean, the short kicks where it's, correct me if I'm wrong, they are on the right hash, right? It's at a weird angle.
Yeah,
I think they're on the.
You could have played the center too, like if you depending. I don't remember.
That's true. Like you could go like unbalanced on it and
on that 3rd down, and then they do.
I just think at some point, like that's in his head where it's like I've been this close to it and I've missed 2 already. I just like I don't blame him one bit for saying, like, you know what, let's just try our hand at an offensive play from the 4 and see what happens.
Yeah, I kind of side on the same side there, at least on the can't blame him side. It becomes a lot harder if you're the one actually making the decision. But I do wonder if Kansas State felt like they started to find just like a little bit of a gap in Texas's defense, because overall they couldn't run the ball all game. And throwing wasn't super easy, but it had a decent day. Will Howard, had to carry the load for them and did. But towards the end of that game, when they have the 2 turnovers that they convert to touchdowns. Not only do they convert them, but they do it extremely quickly and with big chunk plays down the field. And I wonder if they had just grown enough confidence in that offense of, hey, like this Texas team, yeah, they were stopping us all up, especially the whole first half. But now we feel like we've got at least a little bit, I don't know, seeing some place in the secondary to exploit. And it's hard for me to say because, one, I don't coach football, so I don't know what I'm talking about that. And 2, I can't see what the safeties are doing on most plays, just because of the view that you have on television. So there's some limitation there, but like I understand your growing confidence in the offense, especially in the 4th quarter. Yes, they're given very good field position by some turnovers, but they also don't struggle with it. They march immediately into the end zone. Texas is going to need Quinn Ewers back quickly. Quickly may be an overstatement. I think Malik Murphy's extremely talented, but he's shown in 2 consecutive games that he will just throw it to you, possibly. It's not a total impossibility that he's going to throw it straight to a defender. And that's kind of a quality that's an absolute no-go for a quarterback. It's, hey, I need your interceptions to be good interceptions, or at least okay interceptions. He's had 2 in back-to-back games, really ugly ones. So I think that'll be important. I don't know how many weeks Ewers will be out, but I think it'd be hard for this Texas team without him to beat. Well, I guess they might not have Oklahoma in the title game.
Yeah.
I think it'd probably beat Oklahoma State. They just need him right by playoff time, I guess. But yeah, a wild game that really, like, I didn't see being wild. I did prior to the game being played, but as soon as it started, I said, okay, I'm leaving this one. I'm going to go watch something else. And then chaos ensues, and it gets close, but Texas pulls out the win. Any final thoughts on these 2 teams? All right, we're going to keep it rolling. Georgia. Georgia has had a light schedule through much of the season. They had Florida last week, who they put a pounding on, but they have a ranked win now against Missouri, 30-21. Luther Burden got loose for 1 big, long touchdown. I'm trying to remember how it was like 40 yards, but I might be wrong. Didn't do a whole lot in the game overall. 3 catches on the day. They really limited him well, and he's the dynamic playmaker for Mizzou. Steve, thoughts on that UGA performance, getting a top 25 win?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before. I didn't get eyes on this game, so like I can't speak to the actual game itself.
Mm-hmm.
More so to me, all right, this is one of the tests, which it's funny, going into the year, I wouldn't have said this was a big test, aside from the fact that, okay, Missouri played them tough last year in Columbia, now headed back to Athens. Yeah, I don't think anyone heading into the game was like, oh, circle that game, circle the Missouri coming to town. You better become prepared. But they gave them a game, like that Missouri team is really talented. I think they're well coached. I'm excited to see, particularly when you look at like what Missouri's doing from a recruiting standpoint. Like they seem like they're once those NIL rules became what they are now, there are some teams that have donors and supporters of those programs that have deep pockets, that care deeply about football, and it's just fun to see some of them start to rise. Like SMU is one that I've got my eyes on. Yeah, they were the NIL like original gangsters back in the day. So, but Missouri's one of them too, and they, recruiting got Luther Burden, and that was like the first year that NIL was like really a thing, and they got him to say yes, and he's, I think, their best player. Like, you tell me if you feel otherwise, but
easily, yeah.
And they're, again, yeah, he was mostly contained on the day, but in a game where there's only 30 points scored by the winning team, a touchdown's a big deal, and so he does score a touchdown and keeps them in the game for quite a bit. I just think Missouri is going to be a thorn in people's sides for the next little bit with Drinkwitz there, who's a pretty strong offensive mind. They've got the recruiting and the backing from, again, you can call it a collective. I don't know exactly how it's organized over there, but they've been able to reel in some big fish on the recruiting trail, and we know what that takes nowadays. It takes dollars. And they've got that. And this is 2 years of saying, we're right neck and neck with the back-to-back champs. And Georgia's looking at potentially a three-peat, and Missouri's the one that keeps pushing them to the brink. So we'll see if they're able to continue stacking more of those recruiting wins and then translating that into, toppling the giant at some point. But I think well-fought game from Missouri. Obviously, Georgia clears a hurdle. From this point moving forward, Georgia has. Sorry, I had it open. Now I don't. Georgia has Ole Miss. They host Ole Miss this week, so they kind of. It's funny. I wouldn't have looked at the schedule and said, oh, they run a gauntlet toward the end of the year, but it is not an easy stretch of games here. Obviously, hosting Missouri was a much different challenge than people thought, in August in the preseason as we were looking at this. Ole Miss has been another surprise. I think people thought they would kind of come back down to earth after a pretty strong year last year. Nope, they're if anything, they're doing better. I think on pace through 9 games, they're sitting at 8-1. And then at Tennessee, which again, I don't think Tennessee's a stellar team, and I don't think they pose a ton of threat to Georgia just on a neutral field. But in Neyland, that's a different story, and that's going to be a challenge. And then at Georgia Tech, Georgia Tech's had a great season. Like they've done better than I expected them to. That's not a problem for Georgia. But that little stretch of Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, I don't think myself looking at August, I would have said like, oh, that's a terrific, that's a really tough stretch. So much as it's, oh, you're gonna, you got to take care of business against Florida, avoid the letdown game at Missouri, and don't look ahead to Tennessee when you play Ole Miss. And it's just that's not been the case, right? Like some of these teams, the outcomes that they've had this season are a little bit different than that. So Georgia clears a hurdle. It looks like them and Alabama are kind of on a collision course to play one another, and we'll talk about that game when we get there. But those are my responses to the game. Again, with having seen only a couple of highlights from the actual contest.
Yeah, for me, this is major for Georgia because this is your first not only game without Brock Bowers, but you're beating the best team you played all year without Brock Bowers.
Definitely.
And Carson Beck, I think, is doing an excellent job. They've done a really good job slowly opening up the offense to him and letting him do more and more. Watch him for Heisman this year because he has this slate towards the back half where you're playing an Ole Miss, who, by the way, they give up a lot on defense, so might get to look really good in that one. Tennessee
in
also not
time.
stellar on defense, but they're top 25 teams you're playing, so it's against top teams. If he's able to knock off Bama in the SEC title game, I don't think anyone sees this Heisman race so far and taking it. I think he's in decent position right now, and he's playing really good football. Early in the season, I was like, I want to say unconvinced is probably appropriate. I didn't think he was bad. I just hadn't seen him do anything really, and I felt like, oh, maybe they're not giving him more ambitious throws or more responsibilities because he can't handle it. And it's proving in this early going where they're starting to let up a little bit more or open up more. That's not the case. He looks really the part. Looks like a top quarterback in college football. And Georgia's just looking as good as can go. We're going to excuse Corey to take care of his kids, and we'll land this ship, no problem. But yeah, Georgia and Steven, you kind of hinted at maybe they'll be number one team after this college football playoff ranking. It certainly wouldn't be totally unwarranted with both the eye test that you have and now you have a win against your first quality opponent. That's something good to have in the back pocket when you're Georgia. You've had a lot of the same sort of thing that we've been living at Michigan of, yeah, it's great that you're winning, but you got to play somebody for us to care that you're winning. They did that this week, and they will do it for the next couple. So need to keep that rolling. Speaking of Michigan, I didn't get eyes on this game, but we have Michigan beating Purdue 41-13. Ryan Walters had some quotes before the game and talked about how he's going to have to switch things up now. He knows everybody's signs are stolen, and they've bought tickets to our games specifically. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. Michigan plows forward, does what they've been doing to everyone else all season. I don't know if you got any eyes on this, Steve, or any insights on Michigan.
No, I don't. But you know what's happened at like Northwestern, where Fitzgerald gets fired, and they're actually having a surprising season where they're a plucky underdog. Do we really want to see what a galvanized Michigan looks like? Because they're a really talented group, and I kind of went off the other day on like how I think it's crap, and I stand by every word I said. I'm not taking that back. What I am saying is that that's a really talented group, and for them to have a us against the world mentality is a nightmare for a lot of teams on their schedule, for basically every team on their schedule. So I didn't get eyes on this game. They've got great running backs. They've got a quarterback that's playing quite well. defense littered with NFL talent, an offensive line that is very cohesive and also has probably 3 or 4 guys that'll likely get drafted when it's all said and done. Yeah, they're a really really good football team and a team on a mission. And based on all the evidence that I've seen, they better cash it in this year. Like, because who knows what's coming down the pike. Again, I don't know how bad they get punished, because it's almost like the too big to fail sort of thing, like with the North Carolina basketball fake African American history classes. Like, it's a big enough brand that I don't think anything major is going to come down, but I do think you might see some of the coaches get out of Dodge at some point here before they get show cause penalties and things like that. All that to say, Michigan's, it's going to boil down to 2 games for them. One of them is this coming weekend, and the last one, is the game. So I don't know. Again, listen to my tone on Michigan from a few weeks back. I don't have a bad thing to say about them. Now all of a sudden, they're dead to me. So I want to see them lose, and it's really kind of a shame, because I loved how they brought balance back to that Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, because for a long time that game wasn't even appointment television for me, because it just felt like we know what's going to happen. Michigan's going to lose, sometimes in absolutely heart-wrenching fashion for Michigan fans. It's hard for me to talk about them without going big picture. So that's really all I got.
I'll at least hint big picture before we resume to the action.
Sure.
But the Big Ten has sent official notice like, hey, we're looking at some discipline, which I think is part of the process, because Michigan will have a lot amount of time to give a response. But gosh, I'd love to see something done this year, because I know the NCAA is not going to get it done in that time frame, and so they always punish somebody who isn't there anymore, and it's the school and the players who didn't play for that coach who end up bearing the burden of what happens, which I don't know how severe it would be here, but I would love to see the Big Ten act a little more quickly, and so you can actually give some of the discipline and punishment to the people who deserved it, or at least benefited from things that were done wrong. Right now, there's a lot of, well, this guy's the one who did it, or at least that's what everything's hinted, and there's a lot of us who were not in the know about it, is the
yeah, he's
definitely
right
what
next
they're
to your
trying to give off,
coordinators
which
a
is not
whole lot for people not knowing. That's the part that's
exactly.
a bunch of nonsense. Like,
It's
no.
absolute nonsense.
And to the people, sorry, like I said, I try to stay out of it. You
Go
just
ahead. You
sucked
got
me
30
in.
seconds. Go get it.
Okay. Well, yeah. So the people are like, well, it's not fair to the players. Like, well, yeah. Yeah, I agree, it's not fair to the players, but that's life, right? Like, sometimes one person's actions have consequences outside of themselves, right? Like, if I lose my job, my family's going to suffer. It's not just me. Like, that's what happens. Like, life is filled with situations where one person's bad choice affects other people who may have had nothing to do with it, right? But that choice was made. It's been documented. There's all kinds of evidence. Like, this to me, I don't know why you have lack of institutional control as a clause, as a principle, and something that you can levy against people if you're the NCAA. If not for this case, like, this is a lack of institutional control. It is, like, point blank. And yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that.
One last thing with Aiden Hutchinson. Did you hear his interview where he's asked about Connor Stallions?
No.
Okay, I'll invite you and our listeners to go look it up. It sounds like you asked a middle school kid about something he knows he did wrong, and he's just lying to try and act like he has no idea what's going on. It is hilarious. Aiden Hutchinson, of course, first round draft pick in the NFL. He's playing at the Lions now, but was at Michigan while Stallions was there and doing his thing. Very, very funny to me. Obviously, you're reading into like body language and how people talk, and it's not damning by any means, but you can draw your own conclusions. I'll leave it with that.
Lots of word salad.
Yeah, not even. It's just like like a kid when you catch them, they're like, I don't know how that happened. We're gonna stay in the top 4 with our playoff teams. Florida State travels to Pittsburgh. They go without two of their top three offensive talents. They have the quarterback Jordan Travis, but they're without Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, who've been the wide receivers who have given team fits this year. Nonetheless, get the job done, 24-7. Took them a second to get going, but this Pitt offense is really bad. I don't know if you've watched Pitt this year. I've watched them a couple times. There's one aberration game where they score 38 and get an upset. But everything else looks a little bit more like this.
Turnover-fueled 38.
Yes, a very turnover-fueled 38. And so this game, while it was like cagey at times, I guess, it never really felt like it was super close. Any thoughts or insights on that Florida State Pitt game?
To me, it's more forward-looking. Having been, following the FSU program as closely as we do, there's a lot of speculation that certain guys probably could have played if push came to shove, and if this was a game where FSU really felt threatened going into it. So it looked like it was more of a load management game on the FSU side. You got Miami this week, huge game. So I think that's part of it. To me, it wasn't even just that the top two receivers are out. Destin Hill, the number 3 receiver, at least on the outside. I guess he's a slot receiver, but wide receiver position, let's say, not pass catchers, but from a wide receiver perspective, he has one catch and is clearly hobbled in the game. Hakeem Williams does not play. Deuce Spann does not play. You were essentially playing the bottom third of your wide receiver depth chart, right? And even some of them were not 100%. And you still passed for 360 yards. Like, that to me is all you really need to know. Florida State is better than Pitt. To me, the question is, moving forward, are some of those guys getting back? Is the speculation true that this was kind of a load management game where you're not rushing certain people back from injury and others that maybe had something that maybe was nagging but maybe wouldn't have prevented them from participating in a game that maybe the outcome was less assumed going into it? I think that you may have had some different players on the field if this was a game that was expected to be a close, tight game. So we'll see. That to me is the biggest thing, because without those players, FSU's offense is not as good. I mean, that's not a shattering analysis right there, but it really takes away a lot of what they've really kind of formulated that offense around is tossing the ball to those two playmakers. Oftentimes it's deep in one-on-one scenarios and trusting them to make plays. Without those two, you have to find something else to do. And Pitt did a good job of taking away the run, and specifically the quarterback run, so that you had to throw to a different cast of characters in terms of the skill talent on the outside. And some of that stepped up. Ja'Kai Douglas, who has been on FSU's roster literally through thick and thin, and he has a 100+ yard game, has made some big plays back in, like you think of like the 2020 year, the 2021 year, he catches a deep touchdown pass against Notre Dame in the opener to make sure that game stays close. Now they end up losing in overtime, but he also is part that jump starts their comeback against Miami right at the end of that game. He's made big plays in an FSU uniform, has dealt with some injuries, and it's good to have that guy. I mean, this is going to sound, it's going to sound however it sounds, I guess. But when that guy who's made plays for you in the past is that far down your depth chart, like, that says something about the roster that you've constructed. But it's also nice to know that he's a reliable guy that's been around the program for so long, and when his number is called, he's ready, he's prepared. So I think that's really the big thing, is like, that's another hurdle that we were talking about earlier, about games that, like, on paper 4 months ago before the season started looked like one thing and became another. That one looked like a very daunting road test heading into the season, where Pitt was sort of like, oh, this dark horse contender in the ACC. They're not that. And this was just more a test of FSU's resolve to find ways to win a game when you're significantly shorthanded when it came to their kind of starting depth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there are a couple, I mean, you mentioned a handful of them, but there are a few more players that FSU rested or played lightly. Jarian Jones in the secondary as well. They've rotated the safeties a lot more than they normally do. With the true freshman Conrad Hussey in there a lot. I'm curious if that was, this is a chance to get reps, or if this is, hey, we want to keep Akeem Dent off the field for a little bit, keep him a little bit healthier for Florida and Miami in the last 3 weeks of the season. This you build it perfectly, because looking into the season, I thought Phil Dracovic was a good pickup in the transfer portal. I thought he would be pretty good at Pitt. And their defense is, legitimately physical and feisty. I don't think they're unbelievable at any level, but they're going to play you real hard. And if they want to take away the run, they're gonna commit to that hard and make sure that you have a quarterback that has to make some throws, which Jordan Travis does in this game. But ultimately, there wasn't the total package there to compete with a team like Florida State, and FSU remains undefeated, likely to stay in the top 4 in the College Football Playoff Bowl. But we've got USC Washington, an excellent game, a winner, a ranked opponent for Washington. They win 52-42. And admittedly, I'm going to say I didn't watch a whole lot of this one. I saw some highlights. I saw Caleb Williams crying at the end, which I thought was pretty unfortunate that you had to focus on him for so long with that. But you do what you got to do, cameraman. Not a moment I would love if I were him. But what was your thoughts and takeaways from this one? A real shootout of a game that was competitive for very much of it.
Yeah, for me, I'm trying to think of like a good comp on the defensive side. I'm struggling to come up with one. Maybe it's Iowa, but I know that's kind of going to be a little bit insulting to USC. But when you're so good on one side of the ball and so poor on another side of the ball, you're living on a razor's edge. You can beat anyone. You can also be beat by anyone, because if the game's close and low scoring, and because you don't have an offense, okay, one coverage bust on defense, and the other team maybe has a lead that is potentially insurmountable if you can't score. Now, the opposite's also true, where in USC's case, like a turnover, the offense punts once or twice, and you've got problems. You have real problems. And I think the same kind of principle extends to Washington, because Washington, outside of 1 or 2 games, I don't think they've played great defensively. I think they're a little bit banged up too. I'm starting to follow that program a little bit closer. So I think that there's some injuries on that side that maybe are contributing to this. But the thing is, I hold that team to a higher standard because I've seen them play physically, right? Like that Washington-Oregon game was a slugfest. I know that there was a lot of points scored in it, but they made defensive plays several times in that game to force Oregon into 4th downs, and then got stops on 4th down. And we just don't see it super consistently from Washington. So I think they're going to be that same thing where they're going to be on a razor's edge with any of these games. When they play Oregon State, is that this next week, or is that a week from now?
I can check that.
That's a team that plays some defense. And, it may not be the great defense it was last. It looks like it's 2 weeks from now. It may not be like the best defense ever, but that's a road game. It'll be in a charged environment, and you're going to need to play a little bit more balanced. And, people when they talk about complementary football, it usually is like, how can I cater the worst part of my team to help the best part of my team, or vice versa. Like, to me, it's just playing balanced and having balance on your roster, where you've got talent evenly distributed from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball, and so on. So that's really kind of what the game boiled down to. The second that that end of half sequence is huge, right? Like, I don't know if you're aware of that, but and Corey's rejoined us. Hi, Corey. Thanks for coming back. So there's the strip sack that ends up leading to points for Washington, instead of USC potentially driving to. Now I'm going to get that mixed up. I don't have like the game log right in front of me, but in where USC was potentially going to take a lead because it was a tie ball game, Washington ends up taking the lead with just a minute or two left in the half.
Yeah, like 47
Um,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, so it really is kind of a backbreaker, and it's I think the first play of the drive, turnover deep in their own end, uh, and then the other part that I would say is just like so much of USC's offense feels like it's just sort of Caleb Williams hero ball. Like I don't know how else to say it other than that, where it just doesn't feel like they're really running plays so much as they're playing backyard football. Like it's so weird. Like he just kind of runs around, and for them having, you know, I don't think the offensive line is stellar there. Don't get me wrong, but like it doesn't. It's not awful. He's not always under pressure, but it just doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of like okay, he's going through these progressions so much as he's waiting until he gets pressure, and then he's scrambling around, and then it's all scramble drill for the. I don't see a whole lot of like route combinations where it's like okay, I'm reading the short, then the long, and I'm coming to the middle. You know, like in like triangles, which is more of a traditional like that's how progressions would typically work. I just don't see that from them. So it's so weird. I don't think they're done losing just because they can lose to anyone when you can't stop anyone. And I don't know. This to me is it's really interesting with both because I draw lots of parallels between these two teams. The difference is that Washington's always made enough plays to keep winning, but they're still going to be tested. There's still going to be opportunities for them to stumble. If I'm a Huskies fan, which I kind of am like a little small closeted Huskies fan, I'm nervous still. There's still a lot of football to be played, and against some really strong teams.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I said they have a hard schedule left too.
Yeah. Corey, jump in. What did you think of this game?
Um, Mostly my reactions were like it was a good back and forth game. Not a lot of defense being played, like we kind of already mentioned. It just the Huskies made the right plays at the right times to win this game. And the last two drives that USC has, they can't come away with points, and that kind of allows the Huskies to put the game away. The thing I get frustrated with is like you fire the DC now. I mean, I saw a thing that online. I think it was Sports Center that said like USC's allowed like 254 points or something like that in the last 6 games. I did the math. It's like 44 points a game. That's insane. Like, yeah, you should. There's no way you should be ranked. There's no way you should have. You should have 4 or 5 losses if you're going to let that many points a game. And in reality, you've wasted an opportunity to have Caleb. I mean, Caleb's a great quarterback. Granted, I'm with Steve. I see a lot of kind of like wait for people can't cover. You can't cover a receiver for 5 seconds. Well, if Caleb can make it, last for 5 seconds and find them open, then he can win the game. But you go back into like the past where with the people that Lincoln Riley's had, he's been able to scheme players open and have good design plays, and I don't feel like that's the same way. I agree with Steve on that, and so it makes me question how good a quarterback is he really? Would I really take him in the first round? I mean, and I think I'd get fired if I didn't take him in the first round as a GM, but is it going to pan out? I don't know because
to clarify, by first round you mean first overall, right? Because he's definitely going in the first round.
Yeah, I mean first in the first round too. Like if I can go get a player that's a surefire versus one that may not. If I can get Marvin Harrison, I'm going to take Marvin Harrison over him for sure. But like, is the first quarterback off the board? Probably. Honestly, I'm not sold on the other quarterback that everybody thinks about. UNC.
Sold on Drake.
Yeah, Drake. I'm starting to fade on Drake quite a little bit. I've never been at Brian's level, but I'm starting to fade a little bit on that. Like these two quarterbacks have kind of choked when it mattered. Granted, neither one has that great of a defense, so I don't know.
Yeah, to me, the thing that I think about with Williams specifically, because he has all this, like, are you missing the early throw, or is it just never there? Like, one of those has gotta be it. The way that he runs around with his head cut off and then makes amazing plays. But I think about when Patrick Mahomes, he's been talked to fairly recently about his time at Texas Tech, and he's kind of like, well, I knew like I was the one who could play, so if anything was going to happen, I had to like kind of throw it all on my shoulders, and that leads to you throwing some suboptimal balls or making some plays, or trying to extend some plays that you shouldn't, where you try and do a little bit too much because everything's on you. You'd think there'd be a higher level of talent at USC to where that wouldn't quite be necessary to the same degree. but I wonder if there is like a tinge of that in there, because you saw how hard he took the loss. Like this, if he wins this game, USC's right back in it for winning just about anything this year. Like you've still got to win tough games down the stretch, and Oregon's going to be brutal in the title game. But they're still in it. They still had a chance to compete for the Pac-12, to compete for, hopefully getting into that top 4. Now, not in that situation. So I don't know if there's any of that plays in. But Grinch being fired, I know a lot of UFC's fans are saying it's too late, but also I'm super happy that it's finally happened.
Yeah.
He's really had a tough little go there, and Lincoln Riley's going to have to get the next hire right, because this was a criticism that was had at Oklahoma, is a criticism at USC. He's got to find somebody who can get at least timely stops, so that way he can run his offense, which he's done really well for years now, and be confident in getting wins against teams that you should beat. Washington, of course, not being one of those. Steve, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I'm interested. I think SC is at a crossroads, which is weird to say in Lincoln Riley's second year. I mean, I don't think they get better next year. Do you? I think they're going to face a lot more Big Ten teams that are going to bully them like Utah has, and like I expect Oregon to this Saturday. It's going to get interesting out there. That's all I got to say.
I would sit there and say, like, the Big Ten doesn't have that many good teams. Like, you have 3, and they're all in the East, like over there. So you're gonna bring 2 other good teams with you. You lose Utah, you bring Oregon, you bring Washington with you, and you're gonna go over there. But now you get to play the Rutgers, you get to play Michigan State, you get to play Purdue, you get to play
Northwestern, Indiana.
You're in a lot better shape because of that. So it may not be that big a deal. The other thing that I'm thinking about is, like, does Caleb Williams being gone, does Malachi Nelson play within the almost within the offense a little bit more rather than playing the hero ball? Because I think Brian made a really good point that Caleb may feel like it's all on him and trying to save everything. The other thing I'm doing, if I'm an Oregon Duck fan, is I'm cutting out big boards of him sobbing on his mom's shoulder, and I'm blowing them up and putting them in the ski section the entire time. I mean,
yeah.
Kudos to the kid. He's got a lot of heart. He's an amazing worker, but I mean, if I'm going against him, I'm going to rub it in a little bit.
Yeah, I would say it's one of those things where you get it, you understand the human emotion, and like that doesn't bother you. But if you're an opponent, well, that's just something you can use to target him and bully him, which is not for bullying, but I am for passionate fandom. So tricky there.
Bully.
Real quick,
fandom.
USC's 2024 schedule, and it's actually by date even. They open versus LSU in Las Vegas, so there's a team that might bully you on the line of scrimmage.
Will LSU have a defense in that game?
I mean, that might be a score fest. It's a fair question, but Utah State at Michigan after a bye week. So at Michigan. Then home against Wisconsin, then at Minnesota. So travel is starting to mount up already. Home against Penn State. There's another team that'll hit you in the mouth. At Maryland.
When I see Penn State finally beat somebody that's decent.
They're like flying cross country basically every other week.
Yeah.
It's nuts. I'm looking at this. Home against Rutgers, at Washington, off again, a second bye week. And then home against Nebraska, at UCLA, and then home against Notre Dame.
So that last little bit, they don't seem to be traveling.
Yeah, they stay in LA for the entire month of November. Oh, minus Washington. Washington's at the very beginning of the month, but the last 4 weeks they're either off or playing in LA, even if it's in the Rose Bowl against UCLA. Yeah. I'm just saying, they're an interesting one to watch for next year.
Yeah, the schedule alone is super super treacherous. I'll also say with the travel, you should check Stanford's travel schedule for next year. It's hilarious. Florida State and Georgia Tech go to Ireland next year and have less travel miles by a lot than Stanford next year.
A lot of teams are going to realize what it was like to be BYU. Going across and playing.
That's
true. That's true. We're hitting about the hour mark, so we're going to pick up the pace just a bit. Bama versus LSU. I don't know if either of you got eyes on that one. This was one that I got to watch a decent bit of. and kind of similar to Washington USC, where not I don't want to say there wasn't a whole lot of defense being played with Alabama, but there wasn't in the early going. It was a lot of matching shot for shot, getting touchdown for touchdown, and then Alabama gets the stop in the second half and gets ahead by a touchdown. Late in the game, you have Jaden Daniels get knocked out, and that's when you realize, oh, this is all going to be over for LSU. Good work limiting Malik Neighbors for Alabama. There's a handful of good receivers at LSU with Brian Thomas and Lacey, who's really good after the catch. I think is one of the better ones in the country, better wide receivers in the country at that point. But it was competitive through about 3 quarters, and then Alabama gets the lead, and they kind of don't let go at that crucial point. Corey, any thoughts or insights from this Alabama LSU game?
Yeah, this Alabama team just seems to be a different team than we saw at the beginning of the year. They're starting to figure themselves out. The defense has been good. People said it's been good, and they've kept them in games when the offense can be figured out. But the offense is starting to figure itself out, and I just wonder how far can this Bama team go. I mean, you still have, I think, what do you have? No, who do you have next week with Bama?
Bama plays Kentucky, then they play Chattanooga, and then they play Auburn.
So you don't have a hard schedule left. It's just a matter of how does the Big 12 or how does the championship, the SEC championship look? Because no offense,
Yeah, it kind of feels.
yeah, I don't think this Kentucky game's close. So, and that's their biggest challenge, I think.
Agreed.
So,
yeah, Steve, any thoughts or insights on that one?
No, what I alluded to earlier is like I think that targeting call on Dallas Turner
A little
was
soft.
pretty soft.
It was a
I
really hard
understand.
hit, but the targeting
Yeah.
was soft.
Exactly. That's to me, and I really wish they would reinstitute some sort of like, if I hit the QB, like when I look at a slow motion replay, of course the ball is going to be 4 or 5 feet out of his hand when I hit him if I'm closing on him and he gets the pass off. That exit velocity on that pass is probably what, 50, 60 miles an hour, maybe faster, depending on where you're throwing it and how you're throwing it. Like, I just don't like how the slow motion replays, everyone's judging it from that rather than looking at it at like real speed, where it's like, okay, that person's going from a dead sprint to he's let go of the ball. I have to pull up and not hit him. Like, so that to me, I didn't even think that was roughing the passer. Like, I that to me didn't look like that's football, right? And I I've heard lots of people do this, so I don't want to repeat the rant, but you can't hit quarterbacks high, you can't hit them low. Like, where can you hit them? Yeah, you can't put all your weight on them. Like, to me, at some point, like, that's just part of the position, right? It's, yeah, you're a defenseless player, but I mean, to me, it's like you choose to be a defenseless player, right? Like,
yes, you can
it's
the
same
throw the
thing
ball
for me.
away.
Like,
You can go down. You have a number of options.
yeah, you can run, you can try and avoid the hit. Like I just don't feel like it's a defenseless. Like, to me, I understand. Like, all right, if I dive into your plant leg, that might be something different, or even to your leg as you're stepping through one. Like, that to me is a little bit different, and to me, like, I don't know. I understand that we're all about player safety, but at some point we have to just embrace the fact that, look, this is a violent game, right? Like, we can mitigate the risk to a certain degree, but there will always be risk in this game, and that's just how the game's played. And if we're not okay with that, maybe we just play flag football. It's going to be an Olympic sport this year, or this next year, so the next Summer Olympics. So for those people that have that taste, that's fine. Like, I like flag football too. Like, but part of the game of tackle football is being able to rattle a QB, and how do you rattle him if you're unable to hit him without getting penalized. So I hope Jaden Daniels, is okay. I think the fact that he got hurt on it, to me, is a separate discussion from whether or not the hit was clean and legal. So wishing him a speedy recovery.
just one more thing.
Yeah, Corey, thoughts?
Bama's everybody talks about how good Bama's defense is, and I've heard some talks about whether this Bama win was more impressive than the Florida State win over LSU. You look at the QBR, you look at the quarterback ratings, and Florida State held LSU to less points. LSU was less dinged up, and the ratings for Jaden Daniels were lower, both if you go by QBR or by the other rating. So, like, the Florida State defense is sneaky good. We're starting to see that more and more as we've gone on this year. But just kind of something to kind of think about. Like,
Yeah,
No,
Daniels
people
was
are
dealing
definitely-
early on in this game.
I went back and like watched specifically Joel Klatt's response from who's kind of he's light on he not a strong believer in Florida State this year, and that's not to say that I think they're kind of he had him like 10 preseason, which to me seemed that's fair, right?
Fine.
Like that doesn't bother me. But his response to that basically said, "Oh, they're a playoff contender," but like this week after Bama beats LSU by less at home, not in a neutral site, he's like, "This is what all the great Bama teams did was they physically took it to LSU." And I was like, "Okay, well now run it back then and think back. Well, Florida State had LSU at 45-17 with a minute and a half left. So
and that's
can we revisionist history that now?"
If you look at his QBR against Florida State and his rating against Florida State, that's inflated by an 80-yard touchdown on against a true freshman because Florida State put the backups in the fourth quarter because they didn't have to play the actual game. So
did you see my my tweet on like where they said here's all of Jaden Daniels' passing touchdowns of the year from LSU, and I quote tweeted and was like, "Peep the score on that first one because it's 45-17."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it is the front loaded schedule of Florida State is one that is in danger of being discounted. But if they win out, I think there's no concern that will get mistaken by the playoff committee. It's if there's any slip ups that things might get muddled for sure.
Yep.
We're gonna keep things rolling. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. One of the big upsets of the week, the biggest upset of the week, dare I say. Oklahoma State is as hot as any team in America at the moment. Mike
So
Gundy,
hot right now.
Mike Gundy is being as Mike Gundy as he's ever been, and just being really competitive with the team that a lot of us had written off. Ollie Gordon was a player who wasn't getting touches in the early parts of the season. So you have the loss to South Alabama, who they lost to early in the season at home.
They got run.
Otherwise, this would be a playoff contender that we're talking about. It's not, but this is somebody who is now in really good place to be heading toward the Big 12 title game. They only have newcomers to play against to finish out the schedule, so you've got to still take care of business down the stretch. But Oklahoma State, they jumped out early to a lead. They're able to keep competing the whole way through, and ultimately, when it came time to get stops in the fourth quarter, they got the ones that they needed, kept Oklahoma to a field goal on a crucial drive, and then held them out one more time. Thoughts on the Cowboys?
Ollie
Steve, go
Gordon's
ahead.
at 4,000 to 1 odds for the Heisman, which seems a little
Seems a little long.
I maybe put a $100 bet on that. Just because
Sprinkle something.
Yeah.
He's probably not going to win it, right? You've got Bo Nix in front of him. You got Travis. You've got J.J. McCarthy. You got Carson Beck. You've got Michael Penix, who's the favorite, right?
You can't rule him out running for 300 yards next game.
Yeah, exactly. And if those teams slip, and he does run for 400 yards, 600 yards in the last 3 games, like does he start to be the stats that like tip the scale in his favor? Maybe something just to think about.
You're not wrong. He's got the schedule from now till then to pile on the stats.
Yeah.
The big thing is like what it's going to boil down to. Like if I was to like kind of like cook up what's the recipe for this, I think you have to have Washington stumble somewhere and then beat Oregon to take out both the Pac-12 QBs that are still in the running.
And
then
Michigan and Georgia stumble too.
That's true too. You might need some other help, but like outside of that, if he does it and then balls out against Texas in the Big 12 championship game, like who else do you assign credit for this major turnaround from Oklahoma State from the start of the season to now? And I think you'd start getting a lot of like, oh, Barry Sanders, you'd start to see like the ball would start rolling. So
what you need is Barry Sanders to come out and talk about how this is the best back since me. At Oklahoma
he
State.
already hit the Heisman pose in this last game too after he scored. So.
Love it. I have more thoughts on this game. Can I share a few? I know that
please.
we're running long.
Yeah.
number one, like, yeah, Mike Gundy is one of few like characters remaining in the sport. I feel like it's becoming really sanitized, and I kind of like the people that say what they think. The Spurriers, if you will. Um, Number one, he was asked a question. I think it was heading into the fourth quarter. Those like mid-quarter interviews, which to me are completely useless. But he has like a coherent answer and actually answers the question, and it's like really neat. Like, so the sideline reporter, I can't remember who it was, asks him like, "Hey, there's been a couple of fourth and shorts that you have been stopped on. How can you have better success in short yardage moving forward?" And he's just like, "Yeah, they're running a couple of inside twists that we haven't handled very well. I mean, I think the physicality's mostly been there. Like, I can't remember. I'm paraphrasing what he says, but he's just like quickly breaks down like, yeah, they've been doing this thing that we need to find a counter for, rather than like, oh, we just got to clean some things. Like how
Yeah.
much harder would it be? I'm holding all the rest of the coaches to that standard, just saying like, look, he's not giving away trade secrets there. Uh, he's just saying like, but it is insightful, where it's like, okay, he clearly is diagnosing it during the game and is going to make changes, like, whereas the others are like, I can't say anything that would admit my incompetence, um so they keep it really generic, and I'm not even saying that they're all incompetent so much as they're just like, why can't you just say, like, when someone asks like, yeah, what's going on in the, like, yeah, we got to get the ground game going, like, rather than saying like, no, our pulling guard has missed his block twice. Like, I mean, I wouldn't even, maybe not throw a player under the bus, be like, yeah, when we're pulling there, we really got to make sure that we're making good contact, or that are, that we're taking the right track. As far as you can say something without throwing someone under the bus, like he does. He doesn't blame any player there. He just says they've given us some twists that have given us some hard time. That's a good team, and we got to get it cleaned up. Like, oh man, I loved it. Just thank you, Mike Gundy, for just keeping it real. Um, it's stunning to me that people are not talking about the missed. It's a non-call, but the pass
Yeah,
interference on Drake Stoops. No one's talking about that. Is that just me?
It's a
Like,
really
I
bad
don't
one.
I don't
It is
hear it
really bad.
anywhere, and it is an absolute backbreaker.
yeah.
Like, you get that. Go ahead, Corey.
No, ESPN mentions it and says like because you basically trade 7 for 3, right?
Yeah,
And they mention it, but at the same time, it's like a good team can't blame one call, and that's the thing. Is like you put yourself in position for one call, and like you want to blame the refs, it's going to be rough. But like if it was like they blew up multiple calls on you, it's a bad call. I agree,
It's
but you can't be in the position to have one blown call. But you would have
yeah.
been after that. So
And I totally agree. I'm not even saying that the game's outcome has changed on that call, because there's 3.5 minutes left. Oklahoma State still has 3 timeouts. Like, the game's far from over.
right,
But Oklahoma will be leading. Like, that part is like, they will be leading the game by 1 point. I think that's almost not up for debate. They would have had it since the foul occurs in the end zone, 1st and goal on the 2. Like, there's no way Oklahoma's not scoring a touchdown there in my book.
yeah, I agree.
So it just changes the complexion of the game. Like, and obviously that next possession that Oklahoma State has, where they're just salting away the game. Like, obviously they would have probably played that different had they needed points. But to me, it was just surprising. I don't know if I agree with you. Like, it changes the game to me. It changes the way that those last few minutes play out. But my biggest beef with it is like, I'm not hearing anyone say like, oh, there's kind of a little asterisk on this game, which I feel like should be there. Like, I'm sure Oklahoma fans are still just up in arms about it. I don't blame them one bit. That's a pretty rough call to miss. Um, but
and that's one thing that honestly like drives me a little bit nuts in not only in football but like I'm an NBA fan as well. I feel like commentators are too nice to refs, and
oh
it's
yeah,
like if they have a terrible call or a terrible game, like you should let them know, like or not let them know, but like say what you see. Like I think as an MMA fan, I appreciate that they are willing to say, hey, this referee's doing a terrible job at splitting up this fight right now. I watch European soccer all the time, and they'll be like, yeah, this ref is just handing out yellow cards for no reason right now. Like they'll really go after them. Why can't we just be honest with our viewers and say, yeah, that makes no sense to me. Like, this is ridiculous. Um, I don't know. I feel like they get brushed under the rug all the time, and it's like it's very hesitant to blame a ref for anything. And I don't understand where there's even pressure to not blame a ref, or not. I shouldn't say blame, but like point out a missed call. Yeah. The other thing I'll say is on your um, complimenting Mike Gundy for his interview. I love that sort of stuff. Brad Stevens was one in the NBA former coach of the Celtics, and they'd ask him, "Hey, what do you need to do to get Jason Tatum going?" He's like, "Well, every time I pass him the ball on the anywhere inside, they start to double him from the baseline, so we just got to make sure that he knows where his outlets are from there." And it's just like, okay, so you're saying what the defense is doing to it, and you're not saying, "Hey, this is where he's going to pass it." We're just saying he needs to know where the options are to pass out of the double team. Like that is, I don't know. I love that sort of clarity, and it lets him be like, oh, you know what you're talking about. You actually know what you're doing live, not like only throughout the week you're coaching, but as you're on the fly, you see what's going on, you're diagnosing, you're making changes. As a fan, if I'm an Oklahoma State fan, like I like to see a coach who's showing he knows in the moment the adjustments that need to be made, not just the game plan going into the week. We'll move on from that, but the biggest shakeup from the week for sure is Oklahoma being outside of the college football playoff picture and outside of the Big 12 championship game at the moment. Looking in, Clemson have the big shakeup this week as well. They get a win over Notre Dame. Notre Dame has had good moments this season. They've had a lot of moments where they didn't look as good as you thought they should, but ultimately were a top 15 team for a long time throughout the season. Clemson finally gets the turnovers to go a little bit more their way in a game and forces some big plays and pretty comfortably takes care of business against Notre Dame. Corey, thoughts, insights on this one?
Yeah, no, they finally took care of the ball, at least for the first half. The second half was a little bit of iffy, and they almost got themselves. But like they've had the worst turnover luck, and they've had bad turnover luck inside of the red zone while they're going to score. And this week that wasn't the case. They finished the plays. They had the turnover luck go their way. They forced an interception for a touchdown. Yeah, to be honest, like I wasn't surprised about this. This is a Clemson game I kind of expected a little bit because I think the pendulum had to swing eventually their way. They still need to clean up some stuff. Like it's very clear that they give the ball away too easy and too often. I mean, I think off the top of my head, they still had 2 turnovers in that game. Yeah, they had 2 turnovers, a fumble and by Matafa, and then an interception that gets run down to like the 3-yard line, and they almost lose the game because of that. And they end up winning by 8. But this Clemson team has the talent. They just need to make sure they lean on the right talent and stop having the bad luck. Honestly, it's bad juju right now. They need to go get themselves a Garnet the Goldfish,
Dabo is imploring anyone he can to buy the Clemson stock now while it's low. He's had his moment with Tyler from Spartanburg. It's really galvanized the college football community as a whole. Well, this is a big win for Clemson that they've really needed because ultimately I've thought all year they're a little bit better than their record has said, but the problem is it doesn't matter. We judge you on results. We don't judge you on power ratings. So that's kind of why they've been where they are. But you see in this game, especially with the defense that they have and Jeremiah Trotter to single someone out, that type of talent can shift those sort of games so big. And I think this is a really big one for Clemson going forward into the next couple seasons. You needed something to show proof of, hey, we're not falling off a cliff here. We're having a down year, and we're going to be back to being what they need to be. That and combined with usage of the portal are things that are important for them going forward.
Yeah, you're 5-4, and 3 losses have come with either in overtime or from within a touchdown. So it's like you haven't played terrible. You've been in the games. You just had it not go your way.
Yeah. So we'll see what the rest of the year brings for Clemson. I believe they have UNC. Is that this next week or is that
Georgia Tech?
Georgia Tech, then UNC, then at South Carolina.
There we go.
That'll be
so
a good game for
still,
them.
You want to get the win over your rival, and then a win over UNC would look awful nice on the resume. But that'll take us to the last game of the week that we wanted to touch on, and this is a game that I haven't seen a snap or a highlight from. Steve, I'll let you take it away. West Virginia versus BYU in Morgantown. How'd it go?
Not well if you are a BYU Cougars fan. Again, we really cover BYU mostly because we know we have some listeners that have interest in that and have interest in hearing what we have to say about it. Defense couldn't get stops. There were some really interesting things, like This is something, again, we're an hour and 20 minutes into a podcast now, so I don't know how much I want to get into it. There's some things that were happening on their defensive line. It's like, what are you doing? Like, I don't think that that's what they're coaching, where they're like crashing really, really hard. Their defensive ends aren't setting an edge. They're like almost trying to like drive the tackle toward the center, and so they end up giving up like a giant. The edge is easier because it's not even, it's being constricted and contracted. There's some weird stuff that was going on there. Started the backup quarterback, Retzliff. I can't remember his first name. Um, he could play for me. Like he looked good, um, and yeah. I mean, obviously he's inexperienced, but has some juice to him. He's going to be one that's uh, going to be fun to watch when they can like game plan with his skill set in mind. But BYU backs against the wall now when it comes to bowl eligibility. Thought that this one might be your best chance at it. It's not even close. Now you come back home. You're hosting Iowa State. So maybe that's the one you get. After that, it's hosting Oklahoma and on the road to Oklahoma State. I don't think either of those two look like even like reasonable chances of victory at this point. So everything's kind of boiling down to this week for the BYU Cougars. But West Virginia having a really good bounce back year in a year where they've had like tons of injuries, and that team's getting together. Maybe they're starting to turn the corner with Neil Brown. Need to do some things to retain their best players, because that's been a problem in the transfer portal era for West Virginia specifically. But yeah, not an encouraging performance for BYU fans outside of the quarterback, who I think, you know, I mean, it's one game, but I felt like he played winning football, and I don't know if you've got that from Keaton Slovis on a couple of outings, and he can at least, he's mobile.
Yards in 3 games, and he throws for over 200 yards in his first game. Like, that tells you right there, I think, a little bit, like, that he's and he's without Lassiter, and I think Chase is hurt a lot in that game. So, I mean,
Chase is out for drives. Epps was not available. Was it Epps? I'm going to get that wrong, actually.
Lassiter wasn't playing.
That was it. I think Epps played. Excuse me. I think I just misspoke there. Yeah, I think you can work around him. It was really tough ask to go to Morgantown in a night game and start your very first game at the FBS level. Again, he was a junior college transfer, but I came away encouraged with his efforts. I came away a little discouraged from the defensive line. I've harped on that a lot. I think that's the major weakness of the team, is that they just don't have the defensive linemen, or really the offensive linemen either. I don't think the offensive line's particularly sharp either. But yeah, I think that now that you've got a player back there that's a little bit more mobile, can make plays outside of the pocket, and can potentially mitigate some of the challenges that you have blocking it up, that's going to open up a lot of other things where you can do some zone read stuff, which will open up some more holes for the running backs, which they've struggled to really get the ground game going. He's got an arm and can throw the ball pretty well. I think, again, obviously, I think if you're BYU, your goals make a bowl game, which, again, I think boils down to this week. But outside of that, you've got some pieces to build on from the future. That's really kind of what I've been looking at for this year. It's like, who are the guys that are going to be able to help you as you continue to make that adaptation to a higher level of play in conference? And you've got some pieces there that I think there are some guys that it's like, he can play for me, and some of them it's he can play for me in certain circumstances, but right now he's being asked to play all 3 downs, and it's just not right where he needs to be. But there's some pieces there from, yeah, I mean, I can name them off, but like, Essera is I think a pretty good linebacker. The Harrison Taggart transfer from Oregon is a pretty solid player. Crew Wakely in the defensive secondary needs to get his head screwed on straight when it comes to like not getting boneheaded penalties, but he's a good player. Ethan Slade is one that I like, but he's more one when it's like, okay, I need him playing more when he's able to play downhill and play the run. So he's more of a situational player for me. LJ Martin, the freshman running back, is really good.
Yeah, you got to
He's
keep
really
him from
good.
going somewhere else.
I was gonna say he's gonna be really good for BYU next year, or he's gonna be really good for someone else. So they have some pieces. It'll be fun to watch if they're able to keep those guys on the roster and start to build and become more of that Power 5 caliber more consistently. You've had, the last couple of teams they've had, I think, have had winning records against Power 5 opponents. So they've been at that level for a while. I think it's unfortunate you're kind of in a down year as you make the transition, which makes it even harder.
Yeah. Corey, any thoughts to add to that on BYU?
Nope, none.
Well, that'll wrap it for the week and for our Week 10 recap. Let's go into some parting shots to end this off. Steve, I don't know if you have any zingers this week, or Corey. I know I have just a couple, but
I just want to take a shot at Brady Cook. You have 5 interceptions all year, and you have 2 interceptions in the second half against LSU and against Georgia that end up costing you both these games. I know you guys talked about the Georgia game. Steven said at one point in time he thinks Georgia's going to be number 1. Honestly, if Brady Cook didn't play poorly in that second half, they would have had Georgia on the ropes. And the same way with LSU, he didn't play poorly in the second half, they would have had LSU on the ropes, but he makes those costly errors in the biggest games of their season. So it's kind of rough. You're the best player on the team by far, but just like Caleb Williams, you got to make the plays when the team needs you, and you didn't do it on your 2 biggest games, and it cost you. You're not going to get into the SEC title game. So,
Steve, anything?
How the Grinch stole USC's playoff hopes.
Yeah, there you go.
Fire away, Bri.
That's brutal. No, I got to teach my son a new tradition this week. He had never learned to say "woo pig" while rooting for Arkansas. This is Arkansas's first week without Dan Enos as OC, and turns out significant upgrade. You go from scoring 3 points the prior week to 39, albeit in overtime, to beat the Gators. 39 points to a team that just fired their OC is an issue.
On the road versus at home.
Yes, first ever win in the swamp for Arkansas. It's not great. So Billy Napier, Austin Armstrong. Let's figure out what we got going right there. It's looking real tough at the back part of the schedule for the Florida Gators. They also have a really hard schedule next year, so Billy Napier's going to have to show some real proof of concept quick here if he wants to, 1, keep this class together, 2, keep his job for a long time. Tricky days ahead, tricky days shortly behind as well, as Arkansas gets that win. Good luck against LSU, Florida. It should be great. No, that's all I have. I'll save anything else for another time. That's going to wrap it for us. If you've been with us for this whole hour and a half, we appreciate you sticking with us. Throw us a like. Give us a rating on your preferred podcast platform if you haven't already. And let your friends and family know about us. If they have an interest in college football, we'd love to have them join the conversation. Make sure to reach out to us on our social media platforms, on X, Instagram. DM us if there's anything in particular you'd like us to cover or give our thoughts and insights on. Till the next time. Till the next recap or preview that we have coming up. Signing off. See ya.